Feronia was 10 when she lost hope. The childish innocence of her youth, of hours spent frolicking in rainbow fields, playing hide-and-seek in clouds, chasing other fae in the clear sky, all was for naught when the day came. She'd always known such a thing was impossible to hide. All those moments of hearing her caretakers whisper it in barely concealed fear. All the friends she made slowly disappearing one by one as they all came of age. It was simply her turn this time around. Yet, no matter how much her caretakers had cooed and reassured her, no matter how much advice everyone had given, since she was but a wee little bug with buds for wings, nothing could have adequately prepared her for the reality of being soul-shackled. The binding of her soul to another, yet never receiving the same courtesy. The want that stirred from the depths of her being, the need to satisfy, to please, regardless of her own unwilling mind. But in the end, there was nothing but for her to endure it. It was a fate woven into the tapestry of her life, to always be beneath those of more blessed destinies. It was not a hard role to play. All she had to do was be a good little servant, keep her head down, and she'd be fine. Never mind the automatic flinching that comes from hearing the tip-tap of pincers, the faint trembling from being studded with eyes that pierced through her soul and threatened to unmake her. She was fine. She was not fine. But that was a dangerous thing to admit, so she swallowed down the uncomfortable truth and made her peace. This was life, as dictated by the mighty realms of the ether, and this was how it would stay for many more. Or at least, that was what she believed. What everyone believed. Yet something changed. In the midst of the eternal dance between the realms, the never-ending conflicts that lighted the void with colour, a particularly violent battle had burned so bright and brilliant that it had torn a hole through the void. Now, a simple lone hole wasn't a cause for concern. The countless battles that had existed for eons made such an occurrence fairly commonplace. No. What had made this one so unique was the vast mana that poured out, near limitless and so utterly brimming with power. Feronia knew, for it was everywhere. In the excited whispers of her betters, in the constant gossip of her fellow soul-shackled, in the pages of newspapers with screaming headlines, sometimes literally. But none of it was Feronia's business. It may be a fascinating topic, but in the end, it blended in with the other power players of realms, a game best left far away from her life. And so she continued her own miserable but predictably mundane life, cleaning, cooking, washing, and, if she was lucky, her soul would get a pass from monthly check-ins, which usually meant the sensation of needles pricking her from the inside and left her feeling hollowed out for a day or two before she recovered. Nothing could interrupt her painful mundanity, except it did, and it was all because of that hole. That wretched hole. Apparently mana wasn't the only thing it hosted. As greedy hands poked and prodded at it, vying to use the power it offered, a new realm was inadvertently discovered. A realm of pure mana, of beings whose very souls radiated power, whose homes nestled at the heart of what seemed like the birthplace of magic itself. News ran rampant. Conspiracies and theories alike took center stage, indistinguishable from one another. It was beautiful, murmured the elves. It was dangerous, hissed the orcs. It was a pain, shouted Feronia, using her inside voice. Because the existence of these beings meant a paradigm shift, ruling powers made plans and contingencies, managing representatives hastily sent by eager noble houses, which unfortunately included Feronia, as part of the servants sent alongside the representative of House Silk, which unfortunately placed her right at the center of everything, which allowed her to observe the first contact. It was a chaotic affair, upheld by a fragile truce that threatened to snap under the slightest pressure. But the new threat took precedence over past grudges, and, if even for only one day, the realms maintained a facade of unity, ready to welcome these strange beings into the dance. It was the same procedure for every other first contact, though none required as many security measures. Double the wards, double the guards, as this one. In hindsight, they weren't wrong to be cautious. They were just cautious about the wrong thing. It all started normally. Those beings had descended from their ships, vessels of metal glinting sharply against the dark backdrop. If there was one thing the new realm knew what to do, it was how to make an entrance. The vessels thrummed with magic, every line of paint sparkling wondrously. And when the doors opened, a brilliant outpouring of mana. It even caught Feronia's breath away, despite her poor senses. When the beings finally came into view, a faint audible gasp rumbled throughout the room. Every step they took shifted the waves of stagnant mana, not unlike a pebble thrown across a lake, sending arcs of expanding circles throughout the room. Their forms resembled the elves, much to their gleeful delight, near indistinguishable, if not for the blindingly radiant magical essence their bodies held. And yet, despite the clear power imbalance that hung over the room like a brooding storm, the meeting was surprisingly going well. These new beings, humans as they described themselves, seemed uncharacteristically fascinated by the various realms, and not in the clinical passion a botanist would document a new plant species, but in the genuine curiosity of a child making their first friend. An irony definitely not gone unnoticed by the many diplomats, politicians, and royalty milling about. This unexpected enthusiasm from beings everyone had expected to be prideful, dangerous, and filled with untapped power set an unsettling tension all around. And this tension only increased with every friendly exchange, excited talks about culture, and every random blabbering about peace and cooperation these humans seemed so fond of. Feronia had to tip her head off to them, though. Their act was immaculate, and if it wasn't for the cold sensation of chains woven tightly against her soul, she might have very well fallen for their pretty lies. With how they went on and on, it was almost as if the eternal dance was a made-up hallucination instead of a sacred law of the universe. After some time spent wading through this invisible tension the humans acted completely clueless about, one brave diplomat finally asked the question that had plagued just about everyone, but so far left to rot on tips of tongues, tempered by caution, or plain fear. As a sign of goodwill towards our blossoming relations, would you demonstrate your magical prowess you've no doubt perfected? Cue a sudden silence that swept the room, as curious eyes turned toward the elf in question, whose centuries of etiquette classes were put to the test, as he fought not to shrink into himself in embarrassment. An almost comically long silence stretched across the room, until finally the human diplomat said, "We don't have magic." Chaos erupted, and Feronia had to fight to hold onto the cutlery she'd almost dropped out of shock. Did she hear that right? She must have, judging by the outraged voices screaming for attention. But why? Why such a blatant lie? In fact, why even lie at all? It should be fairly obvious that they're the most powerful forces here in terms of raw power, and by a wide margin. Was it for pure entertainment? Cruel, but not entirely unreasonable. Was it for some weird power play over the other realms? All too likely for her tastes. Or perhaps, was it the truth? That these beings of the purest form of mana were genuinely unaware that they had magic at all? A puppet with the truth curse could tell a better lie. Luckily for Feronia, she wasn't allowed much time to ponder over this bout of badly orchestrated deception, mainly because the meeting went south immediately after. The fragile peace has snapped, and there was no pacifying those bruised egos pushed to the edge by a newbie race implicating their apparent superiority. She wasn't sure exactly what happened, being neither knowledgeable enough for the complicated curses and spells being cast, nor caring enough given the prior shock. But then again, the details would never matter. The age-old question of who done it would remain a point of contention many years later, and the immediate audience may only recollect contradicting narratives. The only thing that mattered in the ensuing all-out brawl was one casualty. A human casualty. A creeping feeling crawled up Feronia's back, even her untrained phase senses picking up on a change so radical it was impossible to ignore. This was the moment that would alter the fabric of the universe itself, transformed forevermore by one unfortunate act of violence. The many realms already assimilated in the Eternal Dance had just received a glimpse of the most powerful beings ever known, succumbed to what amounted to rookie tricks fueled by a flash of rage. The human can bleed. The human can hurt. The human can die. In the short time span of confusion and realization haunting the realms, the humans reacted fast. In a blink of an eye, many of the dignitaries had boarded their ships, and the remaining quickly herded their own out of the line of danger. Recognizing that the newly vulnerable realm was slipping out of their reach, the boldest of the representatives chased after them, spells tearing out of their hands in mere seconds. These rapid spells bounced harmlessly off of the humans. Feronia reasoned that they must have finally shed their arrogance and put up a decent shield. What she couldn't reason was the strange contraptions a few of the humans suddenly held up. One particularly crafty elf raised their hands up, already tingling with power at the tips. His face was the perfect picture of concentration, a lengthy incantation pouring out of his lips. Spheres of light collected in his hands, and a loud sound, like the crackle of thunder. The elf collapsed on the floor, eyes glassy. His essence drained out of him in waves, joining the atmosphere once more. He was dead. That, perhaps rather predictably, did not stop the increasingly manic, bloodthirsty crowd from pausing their pursuit. Although no one knew how the humans had killed the prideful elf, it was much more in line with the unstoppable, powerful beings everyone had in mind. Thus, the mysterious killing method shocked no one. The most important lesson learned was that they could be killed, and if they could be killed, any powerful spell they created could be countered. This period of panic and mass mania lasted for the longest few minutes Feronia had ever felt in her life, most of which, after the first few seconds, she spent diving under a tablecloth and hoping no errant spells caught her there. It was only after the noise had finally simmered down to faint, discontented murmurings that she came out of her hidey hole, trying to discreetly join her entourage. With all the chaos that had occurred, no one had noticed her gone, thankfully enough. House Silk's representative, an aging arachnid, had decisively not joined in with the other nobles' rampage. With their group relatively unscathed, aside from a few other servants blasted by wayward magic, things moved on more predictably from there. They boarded their vessel back, as did other races, spent an agonizing amount of time on the ship wary of ambushes, before reaching back to their home realm in a couple of weeks. Feronia felt more than relieved to be back to her mundane routines. All the excitement had thoroughly worn her out, and never before had the thin spider silk cloth she called a bed been so appealing. And so she let herself drift back into the rhythm of her predictable life, safe and far away from any sort of danger. Except she wasn't content. She never had been, but after the infamous First Contact disaster, her misery felt starker and more blatant than ever. The increasing workload and constant threats only served to worsen her peace. The realms beyond had not fared better. When the first get-together hadn't worked out, individual realms had reached out to the humans, with minimal levels of success. Most of it was an invitation to the eternal dance, the previous worry of the new realm being too powerful to dominate washing away. The realms were more than eager to bring in another participant, especially one so interesting. News constantly permeated through the walls of House Silk, and therefore to Feronia's ears. The lack of any reaction from the humans was slowly frustrating the wider universe, including the arachnids, judging by the constant meetings of suspicious dignitaries, harsher insults lunged toward the soul-shackled, and the rescheduled weekly check-ins. It was after one of these check-ins that Feronia stumbled into the servant quarters. Useless wings drooped down her back, hair tangled and unkempt, her entire being emitting only the faintest whiff of mana, making her akin to a piece of furniture, rather than a living fae. The sight of her dishevelled form roused a few acquaintances. Calling the others friends was a bit too much. The soul-shackled do not have friends. To help her to the nearest table and patch up some of the more glaring wounds. Through the fog of her mind, she could barely make out the gossip going around the room, in hushed, excited tones. But against all odds, one particularly scandalous rumour managed to reach her all the same, and one especially fresh, judging by the shocked wonder that pervaded the room. One realm, a faction of the griffins in particular, had decided to take a rather forward approach to the matter, jumping from invitation to outright initiation. Having enjoyed the past few consistent victories, their boisterous force hungered for new prey and launched a full-scale invasion. This surprised no one, many anticipating that at least one realm would eventually bite the bullet. The griffins had always been a stubborn bunch, with above-average enthusiasm for all things bloody, allowing them to thrive tremendously well in the dance. Except something had gone awry. After a couple of weeks of radio silence, a nearby realm sent a couple of scouts around the system, only to find nothing. Nothing at all. It was as if all the griffins had packed up and left, abandoning their homes, architecture still intact. A still painting, with no life to be found, almost preserved in time. And worst of all, there was no magic. No mana. A dead realm. Fearful outrage sparked across the galaxies. How could this have happened? And done to the radar, no less. Fingers pointed at the humans. It was clear that they had had a hand of some sorts in the collapse, though of what kind no one was sure of. What was once tentative acceptance brewed into righteous fury. This went beyond the acceptable limits of battle. Whilst destruction was expected in the Eternal Dance, complete annihilation was heavily frowned upon. Most realms, if subsumed at all, were repurposed, just as the Fae were. And despite the simmering unease that wrought through Feronia's soul, despite the passive indignation at the callous disregard of rules that were imprinted into her being, a very tiny, barely worth any note, part of her couldn't help but feel dimly satisfied with the outcome. No matter how brutal, strange, or insufferable the new realm was turning out to be, the humans were breaking down the rules of a universe once set in stone. Feronia was 100 when she found the smallest flicker of hope flaring in her chest. That's a compelling story you've got there. A voice, gentle and warm, spilled from lips all too pure. The creature hummed with interest, not pity. Never pity. Only the sympathy of a kindred spirit. One who had felt the harsh swing of a knife before, and still managed to extend a bloody hand to another in chains. A shiver travelled down Feronia's spine, as the voice curled around her like a warm blanket. It had been some time since she had started meeting with the human, under the cover of night. Starting as an accident, now a purposeful routine. Where she once refrained from even talking to him, their meetings had slowly broken her walls down, until she had confided everything she could think of. Perhaps there were manipulations at play. Feronia was well aware. Yet she found she didn't mind. The act of going against her master's will without their knowledge, far too exciting to care. More so, the human had never expressed any ulterior motives throughout their conversations. The first time he lied, she knew. His name, when asked, he'd introduced himself as Puck, with an amused chuckle. No matter how weak, her senses felt the wrongness of the name. The way it bounced off of him, an artificial replacement that hid the truth. It was not the name, but Feronia did not blame him. She would not trust herself with his true name either. The second time he lied, it was so obvious it hurt. He was still insisting that their realm had not used magic at all, while glowing brighter than an enchanted firefly. At that point, Feronia had let it go, like the harmless lie it was. No matter what he said, the ethereal beauty he projected around them painted a very different picture. And as she found comfort in the magnificence of his presence, if being around him revitalized her, well, it was her secret to keep. The third time. She wasn't sure if there was a third time at all. The thing was, their meetings were never used as an exchange of information. Never clear bargains with stakes and strings tied to ordinary words. In fact, the closest she could describe their conversations was as that of companionship. He would come, without fail, and always listen to whatever she had to say. No matter how stupid, no matter how mundane, he listened attentively, like a silent sentinel she could always depend on to be there. On the nights she wept like an ugly fountain, he was there, patting gently on her back whilst his aura curved around her, protectively. On the night she shrieked in uncontrolled rage, he stayed, a steady anchor that did not flinch, only bent inwards to hear the grief beneath the anger. And so, here they were, weeks or months, She couldn't recall, but it did not matter. Puck was here, like he said he would be, and Feronia was content for it to stay that way.
You know, you never told me, she questioned.
She could actually do that now.
What happened to the griffins, anyway?
A breath hitched, a silence that stretched too long. She studied the conflicted tones his aura took, suddenly debating on something.
Even if you did kill them off, I won't be mad, okay? I think it's wicked cool, actually. I can say that, right?
Puck let out a startled laugh, and Feronia smiled, glad to have killed the unwanted tension. We didn't kill them off, and we don't intend to, never have. No matter how hostile our realm's rulership is, it is highly representative of the whole populace. We have no quarrel with the common people, who may not have a choice in what their superiors do. His eyes flashed warmly at her. You are much more than the shackles they put you in. He was going to kill her. By comparison, that cut deeper than any knife could have. Blinking away the wetness of her eye, she stammered out,
That still doesn't explain why the griffins vanished.
A pause. They are safe. He finally let out. Where no harm shall come to them, and they can do no harm to anyone. He straightened his back. Not like anyone has particularly worked hard enough to look for them. Who knows? Maybe you'll find them thriving in the place you least expect. Feronia hummed in contemplation.
So you never broke the rules of the eternal dance after all?
She swung her legs from where they hovered in the air.
Maybe if you showed them proof that the griffins still live, the realms will still welcome you back with open arms.
And she would not have to worry fervently about her human dying. Of the day she would come back to this old rowan tree and find him gone. Of the destruction of humans with the realm's inevitable victory. No matter how unrealistic, she wished this perfect dream could last forever. The eternal dance? A faint distaste curled to the edge of the words. Feronia, I want to ask you a personal question. You may choose to abstain from answering if you so wish, but I would like to pose it all the same. How much do you trust me? She did not have to think. The words came ready instantly, flowing easily from the tip of her tongue.
More than anyone else.
He nodded. Then, can you tell me what you know about the eternal dance? She tucked her legs in and dipped down to the ground from where she had been floating. Grass tickled her knees as she hunched forward in contemplation.
I never had proper mentoring, so I don't know how they word it officially, but it's the universal law that everything and everyone must be constantly fighting. At the same level, I think, because if you get too lax, everything gets stagnant, and your enemies progress ahead of you, so you fall behind and die, and if you overcompensate, you make yourself a threat to everyone else, so they all band together to kill you.
She straightened herself.
That's why everyone is so on edge. They are required to kill you by the very rules of nature, but if you prove that you didn't completely eradicate the griffins, they'll get off your backs, just like the arachnids did with us Fae. She gestured. They didn't eliminate us, only repurposed us, so to speak.
All the while, Puck had been listening intently, which only made Feronia want to ramble on and on. She couldn't recall the last time someone actually wanted to hear what she had to say. Her brood family and caretakers always saw it fit to lecture her, disregarding any defences as mere excuses. Her masters were so high up in the social order that merely hearing them speak is a privilege in and of itself. That's to say, this was a unique experience, and one she found herself wanting more often.
Why do you ask? You must have some form of the eternal dance in your realm too.
He hummed, and after a while of calm he spoke. I suppose you are right. Our philosophers have published insights similar to what you've described, many, in fact, and I agree that the same principle would apply to us if you came to Earth. Feronia nodded in satisfaction. Of course, they were knowledgeable enough to piece it out. A good few centuries ago. Her mind started to a stop. Wait, what? But then, that would mean... A breath left Puck. Not quite a sigh, but almost one. Humanity wasn't always free of conflicts. We fought for a lot of reasons. Greed, material needs, or even out of honor. Deep brown eyes bore into her, as unyielding as the ground. But I can assure you none of us ever fought because it was a law. If anything, most of our conflicts occurred with the aim of their cessation. We fought so that one day we will be able to stop. Feronia's being trembled slightly, wings bristling. Not out of fear, no. Out of the natural resilience against any change. Out of the concept she held to be true, dissolving like mist in sunlight. Out of the implications those innocent words held. And before she could think any more traitorous words, any impossibilities best reserved for fantasy, she blurted out, "Did you succeed?" The question hung in the air, like the hush that followed after the toll of a bell, marking something inevitable, marking the point of no return. And impossibly he smiled, as if he were not about to rewrite reality itself. Smiled as if they were two friends comparing wing lengths. Smiled as if he were not about to contradict the rules of nature. If we didn't, I imagine I wouldn't be here right now. He leaned back casually. Of course, there will always be obstacles, conflicts that pop up from time to time. We are a rather proud people, I'll admit. But throughout the years, after a lot of trial and error, we've grown and expanded. At some point, fighting became stale and unproductive, especially when cooperation tends to reap the sweetest fruits. His grin widened, and for the first time, Feronia wondered how such a blunt set of pearly whites could still incite so much fear. That's not to say we abolish fighting entirely. Rest assured, competitions and challenges exist in as many varieties as you can imagine, and more. The difference is... Warm hands filled with so much light reached for her own cold ones, seeping into her essence like the first moments of daylight, pleasant instead of scorching, inviting instead of controlling. The brief moment of fear was quickly forgotten, replaced by something heavy in her heart. Every life is precious to us. We fight to save, free, and preserve. To maintain the right of peace now enjoyed by generations after generations. And if someone decides to cross us... A pause, monumental, weighty. We fight to protect. Those hands tightened around her. It didn't hurt. Instead, it almost felt as if she was the one who deserved to be protected. No. Without realizing it, she had thrown herself backwards. The cold air brushed against her skin like a warning, the previous warmth and protective aura gone. She shivered from where she stood, hunched. Her eyes were wild and her teeth were clenched, a ragged mutt lashing out at the first kindness it had ever felt. It burned. Why? It was a faint sound, barely recognizable as a word. Why? Well, because you're an individual who deserves... No, why? She insisted, her voice growing louder. Why waste your lives for me? My purpose is to serve my betters. It is destiny, one woven long before my birth. You cannot spout out random pretty words and expect destiny to bend its heels before you. I can't be saved. She stammered, voice losing itself to incoherent mutters and pain-fueled whimpers. And there he stood, unflinching, the perfect anchor. When he spoke, it did not drip in pity or condescension, but understanding. We used to think that too. That we could never change, that we were too damaged, too corrupt to ever fix anything. Fix ourselves. But do you know what made us persevere? What made us go on even when the journey seems impossible? He waited expectantly, and Feronia mustered up the energy to shake her head. Hope. We dared to hope. Dared to dream of a world better than we have ever had. He reached for her hands, and she let him, warmth enveloping her once more. Can you try to hope? Hope for a better future? Hope for a better life? If not for you, then for me? She sucked in a harsh breath, still trembling, still fragile, but she tried. Tried to forget the chains that bound her soul. Tried to imagine a world without them. A world where she could fly as long as she wanted, whenever she wanted. A world where she could speak as freely as the human who held her gently. A world where she was free. She started slowly and uncertainly. I hope. A genuine smile bloomed on Puck's face, so she quickly added, But how can it change anything? More than you think. As if on cue, the air heated up. The previous cold banished like an annoying spirit. At first, Veronia thought it was her own aura responding before she realized she hadn't felt her aura in a long while. And was that smoke in the air? She lurched backwards. The manor, the one she snuck away from, was on fire. Ah! A sheepish voice sounded from behind her. Things must be going somewhere, at least. She jerked back. What did your people do? Puck grinned. You said you wondered how things would change, didn't you? Well, this, he gestured towards the chaotic scene, is just the start. He fidgeted with something from a pocket and pulled out a card. Shiny. Made of something Veronia had never seen before. Magic? It had to be. No natural material could be so sleek and shiny. Use this, and we will know that you are a friend. Now, go back, he ushered. I imagine you have to have some friends. Sorry, co-workers you'd hate to see burned up. And once it's all done, he tapped the tree. You'll know where to find me. And with that impromptu end to the conversation, he stood up, crisp and professional, confidence personified. He moved to leave, to vanish into the undergrowth, before Veronia shook out of her stupor. They'll be angry. They won't stop until they kill you. They'll hurt you. Screams tore out of her, one after the other. They know you can die. They saw a dead human back at first contact. You won't be safe. He paused, then turned back to look at her, and yet his eyes showed no fear, no worry, only a gentle consideration, and something more. Disgusted. Something close to humor. They'll certainly try. Still, it's rather presumptuous of you other realmers to assume you can hurt us. He took another step forward, the trees blending in, leaves rustling, slowly concealing his departure. When you never saw how he died.